The dusty corner of the Hartford Historical Society held many forgotten treasures. But nothing caught Dr. Sarah Mitchell's eye quite like the fancy wooden frame leaning against a filing cabinet. The old wedding portrait from 1903 showed what looked like a usual Victorian ceremony. A serious groom in his best black suit standing next to his bride, who wore a beautiful white dress with delicate lace patterns. Sarah, a historian who studied early American photographs, had looked at thousands of pictures just like this one. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe. The stiff poses, the calm faces, the neat way hands and clothes were arranged, all of it seemed completely normal for that time. The bride's face had the usual serious look seen in photos back then, because long exposure times made smiling hard, and people didn't smile much anyway. But something bothered Sarah as she picked up the frame and moved it closer to the window. The late afternoon sun in Connecticut came through the glass and lit up details that were hidden in the dark archive room. She fixed her glasses and looked carefully at the picture, feeling a strange pull toward the bride's face. "Just another wedding photo," she said quietly to herself. Still, her fingers moved along the edge of the frame, as if something invisible was guiding them. The photograph had a small handwritten note on the back. "Thomas and Elizabeth, June 15th, 1903, Hartford." No last name, no photographer's stamp, no other details. The couple looked well off. The fine clothes and the professional look of the photo suggested they belonged to Hartford's growing middle class. As Sarah got ready to put the portrait aside with many others waiting to be catalogued, a beam of sunlight struck the glass at just the right angle for a second. Something in the bride's expression jumped out at her, something that should not have been there. Something that went against everything she knew about early 1900s, photography and social rules. Her heart started beating faster as she understood this plain portrait might hold an amazing secret. Sarah's hands shook a little as she carried the portrait to her desk and placed it under the bright lamp she used for close study of old photos. She picked up her magnifying glass, a tool that had shown her many hidden things in historical pictures during her 15 years of work. The bride's face, which looked ordinary from far away, started to show something surprising when magnified. Sarah blinked several times, sure her eyes were fooling her. She adjusted the focus and leaned in closer, her heartbeat growing quicker every moment. There, very faint, but clearly visible, was something impossible for 1903. The bride was smiling, not a stiff, posed smile from later years, but a real small curve of her lips that showed quiet joy, or maybe amusement. "That can't be true," Sarah whispered in the quiet archive room. In the Victorian era, people had to stay perfectly still for several seconds because of long exposure times. Smiling was not only difficult, but also seen as improper for formal portraits, especially wedding ones. The social rules of 1903 Hartford would have expected a serious, dignified face. Sarah looked closely at the technical side of the photograph. The sharpness was very good, much better than most pictures taken by amateurs back then. The lighting looked professional, suggesting a good studio photographer. Yet here was this bride, clearly breaking every rule of proper portrait behavior. She checked the groom's face, stern and correct for the time. His body stayed stiff and formal. Everything about him fit normal Victorian manners, but Elizabeth seemed to share a secret with the camera, or maybe with someone standing just outside the photographer's view. Sarah opened her laptop and started looking up Hartford wedding photographers from 1903. She compared studio locations with things visible in the background of the portrait, the wallpaper design, the furniture arrangement, even the exact style of carpet under their feet. These might give hints about where this strange photograph was taken. The mystery grew bigger with every detail she found. The next morning, Sarah went to Hartford's main library, surrounded by old books of city records and newspapers from 1903. She had hardly slept, her mind full of thoughts about the smiling bride. What started as professional interest had turned into a real obsession. The Hartford newspaper's wedding announcements from June 1903 showed nothing for a Thomas and Elizabeth, married on the 15th. She looked in nearby towns: West Hartford, East Hartford, Bloomfield, but found no matching records. It was as if this couple had never existed officially. "Excuse me," Sarah said to the librarian, Mrs. Peterson, who had worked at the library for more than 30 years. "I'm looking into a couple from 1903, Thomas and Elizabeth. They got married on June 15th. Do you know any other places I could check?" Mrs. Peterson thought for a moment and adjusted her glasses. "Have you looked at church records? Not every wedding made it into the newspapers, especially small ones. Trinity Episcopal keeps very good records. The Catholic churches also have archives going back to the 1890s. Sarah spent the afternoon visiting churches around Hartford. At Trinity Episcopal, Reverend Williams took her to the basement archive, where old leather marriage books were kept in special cases. "June 1903, he said quietly, moving his finger down the handwritten lines. "June 13th, Thomas Martin and Elizabeth Hayes. "June 20th, Thomas Richardson, D. Elizabeth Collins." But nothing on the 15th with only first names. "What about unusual cases?" Sarah asked. "Anything that might need privacy or special handling?" Reverend Williams stopped and thought carefully. Sometimes there were weddings that weren't ordinary. Maybe a pregnant bride, or couples from different classes. Those might be done quietly with little record. Sarah's heart beat faster. Could Elizabeth's strange smile hide a secret that needed such privacy? As she walked back to her car in the late afternoon sun, she felt she was close to discovering something much bigger than a simple odd photograph. Back at the Historical Society, Sarah decided to study every part of the portrait and its frame very carefully. She gently took the photograph out of the frame, hoping to find more clues on the back or inside the materials. Her careful work paid off. Hidden between the photo and the cardboard back was a small folded piece of paper, yellowed by time. Sarah's hands trembled as she opened it and saw a short note in faded ink. "My dearest Thomas, by the time you read this, I will be far from Hartford. The photographs must tell the story I cannot. Look for what others cannot see. Remember our signal. Forever yours, E." Sarah stared at the mysterious words, her mind racing with ideas. Our signal? Could it mean the smile? Was Elizabeth trying to send a message through her face that proper society would not let her speak out loud? She looked at the photograph again with new attention, searching for other strange things. Under strong magnification, she saw Elizabeth's left hand, partly covered by the folds of her wedding dress. Her fingers were placed in an odd way, not the usual formal position for wedding portraits. Sarah took a picture of the hand with her digital camera and started researching Victorian secret signs and hidden ways to communicate secret signs and hidden ways to communicate. Her search showed interesting facts about how women sometimes sent private messages through fan movements, flower choices, and hand positions. In a 1902 etiquette book, she found a part about finger telegraphs, quiet hand signals women used to pass messages in situations where speaking directly was not allowed. According to the book, certain finger positions could mean danger, love, or urgent news. Elizabeth's finger position matched one drawing, a warning sign that meant help, or things are not what they seem. Sarah sat back in her chair, the meaning hitting her hard. This was not just an unusual wedding picture. It was a frightened woman's brave try to leave proof of something awful. Elizabeth's smile was not happiness or amusement. It was a strong mask hiding fear, and her hidden hand signal was a silent cry for help that no one had noticed for more than 120 years. With Elizabeth's note and her new knowledge of the photo's hidden messages, Sarah widened her search beyond marriage records to missing person reports and news stories from summer 1903. She looked through police files, hoping to find any mention of a woman named Elizabeth, who vanished around the time of the photograph. Her big discovery came from an unexpected place. The Hartford Newspaper Society pages from July 1903. In a small column about summer events was a short note. "The ladies of the Hartford Women's Auxiliary are worried about Mrs. Auxiliary or worried about Mrs. Auxiliary, or worried about Mrs. Auxiliary, or worried about Mrs. Auxiliary, are 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 worried about Mrs. Auxiliary, All worried about Mrs. Auxiliary, all worried about Mrs. Auxiliary. Elizabeth Hayes, who did not come to the quarterly charity luncheon, even though she had said she would. Elizabeth Hayes, one of the names from Reverend Williams's church register, but that wedding was listed on June 13th, 2 days before the date on the portrait. Sarah hurried back to Trinity Episcopal, her heart racing. Reverend Williams got the marriage book again, and this time Sarah looked at the entry more closely. The writing looked different from other entries, the ink a bit darker, as if added later. Reverend Williams, could this entry have been written afterward? Maybe backdated. He studied the page carefully, his face showing worry. It's possible. In 1903, some marriages were recorded later for legal reasons. If a couple had a civil wedding or special situation, they might register with the church later to avoid gossip. Sarah's search took her to the Hartford Police Department's old files, kept in the basement of City Hall. Officer Martinez, a young officer who liked local history, helped her search through the old cabinets full of records from the early 1900s. Missing person reports from 1903, he said, taking out a thick folder. We have many. Hartford was growing fast then. Lots of people moving in and out. Sarah's eyes grew wide when she saw a report dated July 20th, 1903. Elizabeth Hayes, age 23, reported missing by her sister Margaret. Last seen at home on July 15th. Brown hair, green eyes, about 5'4" tall. Family says unusual behavior in weeks before she disappeared. The missing person report gave Margaret's address on Asylum Street, which had been one of Hartford's nicest areas in 1903. Sarah found that the old Victorian house still stood, now turned into apartments. The current owner, an older man named Robert, let her come in when she explained her history research. The Hayes family, you say? Robert nodded slowly. I've lived here 40 years. The man before me said he found some old papers in the attic during repairs. They might still be there. In the dusty attic, under old insulation put in years later, Sarah found a small wooden trunk. Inside were letters, photographs, and papers from the Hayes family. Her hands shook as she opened a diary with Margaret Hayes written carefully on the cover. The pages from summer 1903 told a troubling story. June 10th, 1903. Elizabeth has been acting different since she met the Vibe. At Man, Thomas. She says little about him, only that they will marry. I have not met him, which is strange for my dear sister. June 16th, 1903. Elizabeth came back from her wedding ceremony changed. She smiles when she thinks no one sees, but her eyes show fear. She begs me not to ask about Thomas or where they live. July 1st, 1903. I followed Elizabeth today and found she is not living with Thomas as she said. Instead, she rents a small room above Mrs. A.A. said Patterson's Bakery on Main Street. When I asked her, she cried and admitted the marriage was arranged to help her escape some bad situation. She would not say more. July 14th, 1903. Elizabeth came to me tonight very upset. She said Thomas was not who he seemed, and she had learned something that put her in danger. She talked about leaving Hartford right away, and asked me to keep a photograph she said would explain everything if something happened to her. I begged her to tell the police, but she said they would not believe her. Here, July 21st, 1903. My sister has disappeared. I reported her missing, but the police do not seem interested. They think she just left with her husband, even though I told them Thomas is missing too and their marriage was strange from the start. Sarah's hands trembled as she closed the diary. Elizabeth's smile in the wedding portrait was not joy. It was the brave face of a woman leaving proof of danger, knowing it might be her last record. Margaret's diary gave important clues about Thomas, but Sarah needed clearer facts about the mysterious groom. She went back to the 1903 Hartford City Directory, looking for every Thomas and checking their jobs and addresses. One name stood out: Thomas Miller, private detective, office at 245 Main Street. The address was only 3 blocks from Mrs. Patterson's Bakery, where Margaret found Elizabeth was secretly living. Sarah's reading about private detectives in 1903 Hartford showed an interesting and sometimes shady business. Private investigators then often worked for rich families, sometimes to handle scandals quietly or to find people with important information. At the Hartford History Museum, Sarah saw a collection of old business cards and ads from that time. Thomas Miller's card was kept in a display about early 20th century jobs. Thomas Miller, discreet investigations, recovery of missing persons and valuable items, confidential consultations available. The museum curator, Dr. James Walsh, knew a lot about Hartford's business world back then. Private detectives in 1903 worked in a gray area, he said. Some were honest professionals helping families find lost relatives or checking fraud. Others were basically paid helpers who worked for whoever paid most. What kind of cases might involve a young woman like Elizabeth? Sarah asked. Dr. Walsh thought carefully. Rich families sometimes hired detectives to bring back runaway daughters or recover stolen things or papers. There were also blackmail cases. Detectives might be hired to stop it or to help it happen. Sarah felt sick. Could Elizabeth have been a target instead of a willing wife? The clues were starting to show that the wedding portrait was not about a real marriage, but some kind of forced situation. Her research on Thomas Miller showed more worrying facts. A Hartford newspaper article from September 1903 reported his death in what was called a sad accident at the railroad yards. The short piece said Miller had been working on a case about missing documents when he fell from a moving freight car. The timing seemed strange, just 2 months after Elizabeth vanished. Sarah began to think both Elizabeth and Thomas had become victims of something much more dangerous than a simple missing person case. Sarah's work had reached an important point. She needed to know what Elizabeth might have known or had that put her in such danger. Margaret's diary said Elizabeth had discovered something about Thomas, but gave no details. Going back to the Historical Society archives, Sarah looked wider for big news stories from 1903 Hartford. She wanted any events that might need a private detective and could have accidentally involved Elizabeth. Her hard work paid off when she found a series of articles about a large embezzlement scandal at Hartford National Bank. In May 1903, about $50,000 had disappeared from the bank's accounts, a huge amount worth over $1.5 million today. The bank's president, William Thornton, had hired private investigators to find the missing money and catch the thief. One of the investigators named in the stories was Thomas Miller. Sarah's heart beat faster as she put the timeline together. The embezzlement was found in early May. Thomas was hired to look into it. Elizabeth's diary entries showed she met Thomas in late May or early June. Their wedding portrait was dated June 15th. Elizabeth disappeared in July, and Thomas died in September. But who was Elizabeth in this? Sarah went back to Margaret's diary and read more carefully for clues about Elizabeth's job or connections. She found the answer in a spring 1903 entry. Elizabeth has a new job as a secretary at Hartford National Bank. She is very happy about it because it pays well and the work is proper for a young woman. Sarah's heart raced. Elizabeth worked at the bank where the money was stolen. She probably had access to records, payments, and information that could point to the real thief. If she had found something that did not match Thomas's investigation, or worse, if she had proof that Thomas himself was part of the embezzlement, her life would have been in real danger. The wedding portrait suddenly made complete sense. Thomas had used a fake marriage ceremony, win Elizabeth's trust and get close to her. Elizabeth, realizing the danger, had used the portrait session to leave proof of her situation. Her forced smile hiding fear, her hand signal asking for help, and her note left to be found later as evidence of the truth. Sarah knew she needed official records of the embezzlement case to prove her idea. The Hartford Public Library's newspaper archives had lots of coverage of the bank scandal, including details about the investigation through summer 1903. A key article from August 1903 said the investigation had changed direction. The missing $50,000 had been traced to fake papers and false records, but the proof pointed not to a bank worker, but to someone who knew the bank's methods well and had access to real documents. The article quoted bank president Thornton. "We have learned that our investigation was damaged from inside. The person we trusted to catch the thief seems to have been the one stealing, using his role to hide his actions while taking more money." Sarah's idea was right. Thomas Miller had not been investigating the embezzlement. He had been doing it, using his job as a private detective to get into bank records and create fake papers to steal the money. But Elizabeth had figured it out. As a bank secretary, she would have seen the original records and noticed the differences between Thomas's reports and the real transactions. The last piece came from a September 1903 police report Sarah found in the City Hall archives. After Thomas Miller's death at the railroad yards, police had searched his office and home. They found $30,000 in cash, hidden in a secret drawer, and fake bank papers with Elizabeth's signature. A police note added a terrible detail. Evidence shows Miller forced Miss Hayes to sign papers that approved his fake deals. Her disappearance probably happened when she threatened to tell about his plan. Miller's death looks like suicide rather than an accident, possibly to escape arrest. Sarah sat back, overcome by the sad story she had uncovered. Elizabeth had not been Thomas's willing bride. She had been his victim, forced to help with his stealing, and then removed when she became a risk. The wedding portrait was not a happy moment. It was Elizabeth's desperate effort to leave evidence of her danger, knowing Thomas planned to keep her quiet forever. Sarah's work had brought out a tragic tale of bravery and suffering that had stayed hidden for over 120 years. Elizabeth's clever hidden messages in the wedding portrait, her brave smile covering terror, her secret hand signal asking for help, and her note pointing to the truth, had finally been understood. But Sarah's job was not done. She felt a strong duty to make sure Elizabeth's story was shared and her courage remembered. She wrote a full report of her findings and contacted the Hartford newspaper, hoping they would print Elizabeth's story as a historical piece. The editor, Maria Rodriguez, was very interested. "This is the kind of historical mystery our readers enjoy," she said. "But more than that, it's a story about a woman who showed amazing courage in terrible circumstances." Sarah also searched genealogy sites, hoping to find any living relatives of the Hayes family who might want to know about Elizabeth's fate. Her search found Patricia Hayes, a great-great-niece in Boston, who had always wondered about family stories of an ancestor who disappeared mysteriously in Hartford. "We always heard quiet stories about Aunt Elizabeth," Patricia said on the phone. "My great-grandmother used to say Elizabeth tried to help catch a bad man, but got in trouble for it. I never knew if it was real." Patricia came to Hartford to see the portrait and hear about her ancestor's story. Standing in the Historical Society, looking at Elizabeth's photograph with fresh understanding, she wiped tears from her eyes. "She was so young," Patricia whispered, "but she tried to do the right thing, even when it put her in danger." Sarah arranged for the portrait to be carefully preserved and shown at the Hartford History Museum, with a plaque that told Elizabeth's full story. The display would help visitors understand both the history of early 20th century bank fraud and the personal bravery of one young woman who refused to stay quiet about wrongdoing. Sarah looked at Elizabeth's portrait one last time before it went to the museum. She wondered at how one woman's desperate message, hidden in plain view for over a century, had finally shown the truth. Elizabeth's smile, once a puzzle, now stood as proof of her courage, a reminder that sometimes the most ordinary photographs hold the most amazing stories, waiting for someone willing to look closely enough to see what others missed. Elizabeth's memory lived on. Her story was finally told. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, comment your thoughts, and subscribe.